So today I'm in the garage doing something on the 54 Country Squire that is a little bit more of a want than a need, but it's something that I've wanted to do for a while and it's a good time to do it. And that's change the radiator in this car. This is not the correct radiator. This is actually for a Mustang. I think this is for a 68 Mustang with a straight 6, and I bought it because it was cheap and it had the outlets in about the right place. And 54 radiators weren't readily available, or if they were extremely expensive at the time. It works okay. It's marginal for cooling. So on a really, really hot day, if you get stuck in traffic, this is a little bit undersized for this engine. The original radiator that came with the car was fine until we swapped this engine in, and I went to get a pizza, and while I was gone, my friends put the radiator in, and nobody noticed that there wasn't enough fan clearance, and when we fired the engine up for the first time, the radiator fan ate into the radiator, and it was ruined. So I put this...
Right.
Whoa! Okay, so we've got antifreeze
Your fan
leaking.
just went right through the radiator.
Now I'm in the process of swapping the air-cooled Ford-O-Matic for a fluid-cooled AOD transmission, which means I have to run transmission cooler lines, which means I have to have a transmission cooler. So as long as I'm working up here, now is the time to change out this radiator. I've got one that is the correct radiator for this car. It's an aluminum version of a 54 Ford radiator. Should bolt right in, but we'll find out when we get there. So now's the time to do that. I've already drained the coolant. The car's way up in the air, so I've got a 5-gallon pail under here. That's a nice way to drain it so it doesn't spill. So fairly simple to change out this radiator today. First thing I'm going to do is remove this fan, which I will be reusing. It just plugs in. So black goes to black and blue goes to orange. Let's try and remember that. This is the sensor. It's held in with a zip tie. Set that over there. And the fan is actually just zip tied to the radiator because this was supposed to be temporary like 8 years ago. And interestingly, I tried this with a shroud, and the problem was, in order to make a shroud that would sort of work in here, it covered up a lot of the radiator and I had to run a smaller fan. So this setup didn't cool as well with a shroud and a smaller fan than it did with the bigger fan and no shroud. Kind of a surprise there. Normally you expect it to cool better with a shroud, but in this case it didn't. Okay, next is the rad hoses. I've already got the lower one off. And hopefully I can reuse these rad hoses, but if not, I think I might have radiator hoses in stock. It's kind of glued itself on there. This guy's got to come off. Okay, so next is to unbolt it. There's only 4 bolts actually to hold it in. This is super easy. The tricky part will be just getting a wrench on there because you got to reach all the way down on the front and back. Zip those out and the radiator should just lift right out. One out. Okay, bolts are all out, hoses are all off, lifts right out now. So here's the old and the new radiators side by side. So you can see this is quite a bit bigger. both in area and it's thicker, so it's a better core, should cool better, and just give me more capacity. I don't want to worry about cooling. It'll also look a little bit better under the hood because it is the proper looking radiator for this car. So I'm about to put this new radiator in. Looks good, right? When we look at it from the top, you can see it clearly has a twist. It's not flat at all. It's really bad at that angle. So I'm gonna put it in. I'm gonna cross my fingers it doesn't leak. I'm gonna keep stop leaking this car. A little disappointed in that, but we'll see if it fits. That's the first thing. Is not even sure this is gonna bolt in the car at all, and figure out what we're gonna do from there. But that's kind of the world of buying aftermarket parts these days. This was not a particularly cheap model, but I'm not super satisfied with it, obviously. It's sitting on that lower radiator hose. That bottom hose is definitely not going to work. So right now it's sitting on top of the radiator hose, which is sitting on top of the sway bar. So I think I'm gonna have to take that hose right off, and it's obviously way too long, and I'll probably have to find something different. But looks like overall the radiator is gonna fit into the car. That's good. So now it's in the car, and you can really see how out of true this is, because on the driver's side, the bolts they're not even really snugged up, but it's pretty straight along there where it mounts on this flange. And on the passenger side, it's close at the top, and down at the bottom, there's a huge gap. Look at that. I can get my whole finger in there. I'm gonna put a bolt in there and see if it'll tug in, but I'm worried I'm gonna start cracking welds because it's aluminum, and aluminum's sort of brittle, but we'll try it, see what happens. All right, so the new radiator is in its place. The holes all seem to line up except for that twist. That's why that bolt there, it's not tight yet, but it's holding pressure there. I had to squeeze the radiator in against the frame to get that nut started on there. The bottom one is tightened up. So hopefully when I tighten that one bolt down, it'll pull some of that twist out. And hopefully that doesn't put so much tension on the radiator that these welds start to pop. But we're gonna try it and see. This upper rad hose looks like it's gonna work. I'll have to look at something different, I think, for the bottom. This radiator, that one fits perfect. This radiator sits back towards the engine a little bit, so that lower hose is a little closer to the water pump. So I'm gonna have to go underneath and see if I can figure out something there. Excellent. Now this new radiator sits quite a bit higher than the old one did, so obviously there's a concern with hood clearance. The old one only came up to about here. So a trick I picked up somewhere is to use a piece of tin foil. Because tin foil can get damaged, that's okay. So I just made like a little spear here. Now I already know this is going to fit because this radiator is made for this car and it used to have one similar in it. But when we close the hood, it's going to squish that if it touches at all and show us how much clearance we have without damaging anything. So it closes. Then we can see here it squished it down a little bit. So we got about that much hood clearance. It probably sprung up a little bit when it opened. So that's lots. So no worries there, but this is a good thing to check. And you can make little tinfoil things on the edges if you're worried about the way the hood curves down. So a little piece of tinfoil is a great way to test for clearance on things. Doesn't cost much, and it makes a nice hat if you need that. Okay, so we're underneath the car now, and the radiator hose has to go from this water outlet down here. So it's basically straight down and then 90 degrees over. And the hose that came off it's just too long. If the radiator was a few inches forward, it might maybe work, but it's not going to go on there. I can't bend it any more than it's already bent. It's going to be too much of an angle. So I have to measure this and go find something that'll work at the auto parts store. So I have this piece of wire, and all I'm going to do is bend it the way I would like my hose to go. So it's going to go up like that, and then it's going to bend forward. So put a bend in it like that. I'm going to fit it back up in here. So make sure I get enough to go onto that water neck, and then I need it to bend like that, and this will be the end of it. So I'll probably get another one of these flexible ones at the parts store, but it'll be the length of this wire up to the spot where I bent it here, and that'll give me a better idea what's going to fit on this car. Here's the radiator all mounted in. The fan is on. I also have an oil cooler. It's hard to see, but it's down in there. Let's see if I can get that to focus. You can see that oil cooler down there for the new AOD transmission that I'm installing. The fan, as you can see, covers the majority of this radiator. So I'm not really worried about not having a shroud, because a shroud's really going to only cause air to go through a couple little corners like that. This car has a radiator probe to turn on that electric fan. And something that I found is it doesn't measure well if air can flow through it. So this is a piece of aluminum that I cut. It's an aluminum rad, so I stuck with aluminum so I didn't have two different metals touching each other. Just a little bit of black spray paint. It's held on by the same little holder here that's holding the probe into the radiator. What this does is stops the air from flowing through and cooling off the probe, so that the probe is cooler than other parts of the radiator and gives you kind of a weird signal. On the other rad, I actually had a piece of duct tape on there because that was just a temporary job, but it did make a big difference. So radiator is full still. It's been full for a couple of days and nothing has leaked out, but it hasn't been pressurized yet. Remember that when the engine heats up, the coolant expands and puts it under pressure. So until you have the engine up to operating temperature, we don't know for sure whether this radiator is leak free. I've seen them where it will hold coolant in it. It'll never leak out sitting, but as soon as it gets up to temperature, it starts pushing coolant out. So I'm gonna fire it up and we'll find out. That'll also make sure I don't have any air pockets in the engine. But on this engine, the top of the radiator is a lot higher than the thermostat. So I'm not all that concerned about air being in the engine. Also, whenever I put a thermostat in, I drill a 1/8 hole in it so that it can let air bubble out. But on other cars, like on my Cobra, the top of the radiator is actually lower than the thermostat. So you'll never get all the air out of here. You either have to purge the air out of the engine or you have to jack the front end way up in the air. Okay, the engine's running nice and smooth. It's up to temperature. The fan is switched on. There's no leaks. Okay, so the engine came up to temperature, no problem. No coolant came out, so that's good. It's circulating. Fan's coming on. No drips. Perfectly happy with this. I think this radiator is going to work out great. So next thing to do is get out on the road. So that means I put transmission back into the car. Anyways, if you like seeing this, hit that like button, and if you want to see the next video, hit the subscribe so you don't miss it, and I'll see you next time here in the garage.